All right, I think we're up and running. All right, thanks everyone for tuning in for another edition of Tech School today. We have an awesome speaker, Lewis or Lois is on today. So I'll let her introduce herself in a minute. Just to guys to let you know, I'm one of the co-founders here at Fokcus. I'm also training for the Olympic trials right now. I'm going to be running in a few meets over the next couple weeks. Thanks to everyone in our cohort. Wanted to give a shout out to everyone who's kind of been supporting me in that journey. We'll be running down at the Olympic Training Center in Chula Vista over the next couple weeks. But yeah, for those of you who are tuning in to Tech School, feel free to give us a like, leave a comment down below, share your thoughts, ask a question. We want resources like videos like these to be awesome resources, not only for those who are able to tune in, in person, but also able to watch these, recorded on YouTube and things like that. So if you have a chance, feel free to, give us a like, share your thoughts, leave a comment, and be part of that discussion and be part of that, learning community that we have here at Fokcus. But I will hand it on over to Lois.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Stephen. And you're overly modest. I mean, doing in the Olympic trials is a major feat, and so all our thoughts and wishes are with you for much success and a very successful meet there. I'm Lois Shelton, and I am a fan of Tech School. I'm a fan of Fokcus, and I am truly delighted to have an opportunity to share some thoughts with you. Curling did ask me to share a few things about myself. And so I'll do, a little short introduction to myself, and then I'll talk about my topic for today, which is competitive strategy for startups. And in this discussion of my own personal journey, it'll kind of lead to where I arrived at this topic. Early in life, my family, I was originally from the East Coast. My family spent some time in Nigeria, lived in Nigeria for 2 years. And during that time, we did some traveling around Europe and Africa and spent some time in Egypt. And I was totally fascinated by the pyramids. And I said, okay, I'm going to be an archaeologist. So that's one of the things I wanted to do. And so we came back to the States. We were living in Washington, D.C., in the midst of government. My father was with the Department of Agriculture and a soil scientist, and all things legal and political were going on. So then he said, okay, I'm going to be a lawyer. So first change there. So then I went to college and I took my first class in government, and it was not for me. So I said, oh, nix this. So I said, so I tried economics, and that really seemed I really seemed to like that. It really seemed to mesh with me because there was a quantitative piece, and then there was this qualitative piece, and there was numbers, but there was, how people were behaving. So I decided to major in economics. And I went on there and along with economics. And so with economics, you got to be serious about math. So I was taking a lot of math, which I thought was cool, but it was kind of like super determinant. I thought, I don't know if I want that much determinacy in my life here. So then I discovered that there was this graduate program, I was majoring in economics, where you could do a doctorate in economics and in business. I said, oh, this is perfect. Let me try that. So I was accepted to the doctoral program in business and economics. And so I was kind of cruising along there. I wasn't really sure what I was going to do there, but naturally that program is sort of geared towards becoming an academic. So I said, okay, that's what I'll do. And it was really interesting. So I said, okay, I'll be a professor at a business school. And it was so interesting because I had never known that there was such a thing as doing this, but I thought, okay, I'll do that. So I was in my final year of my doctoral program. I was completing my dissertation. And I said, because I had gone straight through, and I said, I've been in school forever. I've just been in school forever. I want to go out and I want to work and see the world or do something. So my path was very non-traditional. So then rather going to straight in academia, I spent some time in consulting. I worked in real estate for a while. I worked in advertising, which was totally cool, totally cool. And I even spent some time in a position at state government. So I said, okay, this is all fun, but I'm going to go back to my first love, which is academia. So came back to academia, studying strategy and economics. And I find that most of the interesting questions related to entrepreneurship and new businesses and startups. And so I started pursuing that. And so I've been doing that for several years now. I really, really enjoy it. I feel like I have an impact on people, an impact on society. And so part of that involves teaching and coaching and advising. And one of the things that seemed to come up to me was that I'm interested in two fields, the entrepreneurship tools and then also the strategy tools. I said there needs to be more of an intersection between those two. And I think because the two fields can benefit from one another. And I said, you know, when I look in the entrepreneurship field, I don't see much about how to strategize and how to compete. And I look in the strategy field, I don't see much about how to do new things. And so I'm interested in the intersection of both. And so one of the things I've been running into is that in the startup world, I mean, I don't claim to be an expert in it, but I see a lot about competition and a lot about go to market, but I haven't been seeing a lot about how are you actually going to compete? I mean, there's kind of like an implicit idea that you're going to go out there, you're going to launch your product or service, everyone's going to buy it, you're going to grow, and then you're going to get acquired by your major competitor. And that may happen, and that's wonderful if it does. But what if the road isn't that smooth? And what if there's a few bumps along the way before you get acquired and you have your grand exit? And so my talk today is offering a few tools and a few ways to think about that possibility and what you might need to do. So that's kind of my kind of introduction to my talk and kind of a little discussion about myself.
That was great, Lois. And you're pretty modest too. You didn't tell the school you went to though, but you're low key.
Well, people are really interested. They can find that out.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
They're really interested. Okay, so I guess what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to talk about some of this topic of strategy for startups, and in doing this, I went, well, shall we say, old school. I went back to the beginning, back to some articles and back to some thinking that I think is really useful, but I don't see as much of that being discussed in, I guess, the corner of the startup world where I sort of inhabit. And so I'm thinking it might be useful for some other people as well. So in sum, we're talking about competitive strategy for startups. This is for Fokcus Tech School, and it's for today. And one of the things, I see is that when we're preparing our pitch decks, we always have our slide about our competitors. And this is an example of a slide about basically how wonderful our startup is compared to everybody else, in which this is true, you need this. And then we have the go-to-market slide about, okay, it's based on this, this niche we've discovered, or this missing value proposition, or this market that's not being properly addressed or adequately addressed. We're going to just grow, and we're going to have a wonderful market share, and we're going to be, if not a dominant player in the industry or creating a new category, we're going to be create significant value. And I think that's really good, and I think that's important. But I think in between those two, there is some thinking there's some strategy, there's some planning that enables you to get from that niche you've discovered or that gap in the marketplace and to your desired go-to-market size. And I believe that niche, which I've illustrated here is this arrow, is your competitive strategy. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that and talking about ways startup founders can start to think about how they are going to deal with the fact that there are incumbents in the industry and that those incumbents may not be willing to just give up their market share so readily, and that you may have a fight, you may have a struggle involved here. So we're going to spend some time talking about that. Okay, so this is our hope. When we go into the market, we're going to just deliver that knockout punch and everyone's going to love us. This is the hope. However, this might be closer to the reality, that it is an uphill struggle. We have this individual here, he or she is going up the hill with a burden on his back. There's going to be some tough times. And then the reality also is that we as startup founders are here, and these are the incumbents. It's David versus Goliath. So the reality might be a little bit different than what we hope. But there's good news, because David defeated Goliath. And basically he used 5 smooth stones. And here we're going to talk about a technique that smaller firms can use to topple larger firms. It's called Judo Strategy. I went all the way back to Yaffe and Quack 2002. And we're going to talk about Judo Strategy and techniques to unseat larger competitors. And we're going to use, I'm going to use the framework of the 5 smooth stones here. One of the reasons I think that the Judo strategy is so appropriate is that, unlike a sumo strategy, which involves one large force meeting another large force head to head, Judo strategy is all about agility, speed, balance, utilizing exploiting your competitors' weaknesses, and trying to shape the rules of the game in your favor. And so that's one of the reasons I think it's so appealing for new firms, new ventures, and smaller firms. Okay, so we're using the framework of the 5 smooth stones here. So the first stone number 1, is to really understand your competitors' weaknesses. I mean, so often the incumbent firms are portrayed as these giants of strength, and they do have a lot of strengths, but along with these strengths come different risks and different issues that arise here. So the first thing, I mean, you're looking at your competitors and they have all these investments and all these assets and all these resources, but that also leads to risks and rigidities. Because they've invested so heavily, they're kind of set in a path. And so they can't move and they can't change. They have a lot of commitments to a certain way of doing business and a certain customer and a certain way of distribution. And so as startup founders can start to think about, well, where are these competitors? Where are they not flexible? Similarly, a lot of things that looks very intimidating for incumbent firms, they have a very wide breadth and a wide scope. They're serving a huge market, all these customers, but that often also means that they do lack they have less depth in a particular market. They have less personalization and less customization. I know we've been talking about, oh yes, now with technology, we can have mass customization, but that can only go so far. And we see a trend toward customers wanting what they call a more authentic experience, okay? And so that's something that smaller firms, more agile firms can provide. Another thing is that what's really nice, we look at the larger incumbents, and they have all the systems in place and the routines in place and the policies in place. Whereas, in the startup, we're scrambling to figure out, oh, how I'm going to hire this person. What are we going to do here? And and it's a little bit more chaotic, but all these systems and routines create disincentives for them to change. So it's harder for them to get out of a certain way of doing things. It's harder for them to move. In other words, they have to risk cannibalizing a market. They have to risk losing people. They may be facing a major cultural change. Okay. So the key thing that I want to suggest is that instead of seeing only to see the full picture of what the incumbent is like. Yes, they have a lot of strengths. Yes, they might be bigger, but along with all those strengths comes vulnerabilities. And so Judo Strategy and the key part of competitive strategy for a startup is to exploit those weaknesses. And here, I love this little picture because it talks about how this small person with this small amount of money is out leveraging this large amount of money, okay? So sometimes it's not just about the size, or it's not about just the investment, but it's kind of like, how can you intelligently leverage what you have? And when you do so, this small amount of resources or your small amount of capabilities can outweigh the capabilities and resources of a much larger firm, okay? So the first stone in our 5 smooth stones that we're gonna topple Goliath with is to study your competitors, study those big firms, find out where they are weak, find out where can they not move, will it be difficult for them to change? That's our first smooth stone. The second smooth stone is to, once you've sort of identified weak spots or vulnerabilities, and even the most successful firms have them. And I mean, it's not a negative comment on them. It's just the nature of being a company, being in business. I mean, you just can't be perfect. So once you identify those weaknesses or vulnerabilities, there's a cool thing. The next thing is to master movement. And in a judo match, if you watched a judo match, the 2 combatants spend a lot of time figuring out, okay, how can I grip my opponent? How can I move quickly enough so that my opponent can't respond effectively? And so there's 3 ways to think about that. One is to build strength. You as a new startup need to get stronger. We all need to get stronger as a new startup. A lot of that has to do with leveraging and dominating a smaller vertical, but you want to build strength. There's some ways to do that. Next, you want to evade attack. The reality is that as new startup founders, our firms are smaller. And there are certain attacks in which the larger firms can crush a smaller firm. So you want to try to evade that. And then when you find an opening, you want to follow through quickly. And you want to do it in a way that leverages what you have, but starts to neutralize what the larger firm has. Okay. And so we're going to talk about some ways to build strength here. And this is based on a framework from Startup Strategy by Gans, Scott, and Stern. It was published in Harvard Business Review in 2018. And in my closing slide, I have some bibliographic information. And then I've also actually shared the actual articles with Stephen and Curling. So I think those will be available for you to take a look at as well. But here, there's a couple of different ways to build strength here. And one way is to cooperate. Okay. So oftentimes I hear pitches in which new ventures are going to come in and they're going to shake up the entire industry and they're going to change everything around. And I'm thinking that's fine, that's good. But there are other ways you can come in and build strength in an industry. And one way is what we call the intellectual, well, what Gans and company calls is the intellectual property strategy. And basically that's just taking your ideas, taking your intellectual property and being an idea factory and licensing it out to other firms in the industry. Okay, and Qualcomm is an example of that. You know, they basically have this great intellectual property. They license it out, they protect it, but they license it out, and that's a way that they are in. When they first started out, they're big now, but when they first started out, they started sort of sharing that information, and now that's allowed them to grow. Okay, so that's one way to do. Like if you have some sort of special knowledge or special sort of capability that you can license to other firms, and you can be an idea factory for them. Secondly, this is what another option is to cooperate. Another way of cooperating is to be what Gans and Company calls the value chain strategy, but it's being a preferred partner. In other words, finding a place in the industry sort of value chain, whether it is in inbound logistics, operations, or whatever, and excelling in that and providing your competence and your expertise to incumbents. So in other words, this is an example. I have Foxconn here. This is an example of a company who has excelled in partnering with Apple and producing some of the, at least in the past, producing some of the Apple products and getting them to market quickly. In other words, so they're a preferred partner there, and that's a way for them to be strong and to be helpful. Another option is producing private label products. In other words, being an invaluable piece to the incumbent firms. And so that allows you to build strength and also gives you access to all the resources available from the incumbents. Okay, so cooperation is one possibility. Another possibility is competition. Okay, and there's nothing wrong with the competition there. Another way in architectural, this involves redesigning or reorganizing or offering an alternative to part of the industry value chain. So when Zillow started, originally they were just doing search for real estate companies there. And they said, you know, we're not going to try to, take everything over, but we're going to offer this. We're going to take some of these services that are offered person to person, and we're going to take them online. Okay. Similarly, you can go a little bit farther and kind of what we call a disruption strategy, just change the whole value chain. And Rent the One Way is an example of that. They just basically said, look, this is too much money for people to spend to wear, $10,000 or whatever it is for an outfit they're going to wear once. We are going to change the relationship between the purchaser of high-end clothes and the retailer of high-end clothes by allowing this service, allowing them to rent. So if you want to look fabulous in your Yves Saint Laurent, but you don't want to spend half your mortgage to do it, you can just go to Rent the One Way and get it and look fabulous for that one time, send it back, and you're done. Okay. So these are different ways to build strength. Key things are cooperation is an option as well as competition, but in your choice of which option to pursue depends upon the weaknesses you observe in your competition and your own strengths as you as a startup and your own mission as a startup. So there's different ways you can build strength there. Okay, so once you're in the market, you've moved into the market here, and you're trying to get a grip on your competitors, and you're gaining some market share here. One of the things you got to do is to avoid attack. You got to avoid attack, and there's a couple of ways to do that. You're in the market, you're starting to gain traction, what have you. One is the puppy dog ploy. And I'm not sure if Zillow meant to do this, but when they first started I remember reading, they said, oh no, we're just gonna assist real estate companies in their listings and what have you. We're not gonna compete. And so they did that, and they grew, and they developed a customer following, and now they are competing with them. So the puppy dog ploy is being non-threatening, entering in softly, not trying to make a big splash, and allowing and gaining strength in a market share or in a market vertical where the competitors may not be paying attention to, or they may not, it may be unfeasible for them to address. So you come in with a puppy dog ploy, but knowing eventually you're going to grow up and be possibly a full-grown wolf, who knows. The other way you can avoid attack is to simply change the rules. One way Intuit did this, and when they were starting out, a lot of the other players in the personal finance services or personal finance software industry were larger firms. But what they were doing, they were loading feature upon feature upon feature. Intuit, when they first came in, said, no, we're not going to do that. We are going to, instead of focusing on software that does everything that you could possibly imagine, we are going to focus on a few things and emphasize usability. And so they changed the rules about how consumers started to think about this software. And by going that route, I mean, they were positioning themselves differently than the other competitors who had invested all this information and all these resources into features. Okay, so you want to avoid the attack, and then you want to follow through quickly. And I think Spanx is an excellent example of this. When Spanx was being started, I listened to a talk. And the founder was saying how when she first started her company, there was a competitor that actually came out with a product almost exactly like hers, had a spokeswoman that almost looked like her. And so she's this young startup, and this larger firm is basically just copying her entire product and even her image. And she had to make a decision. And so what she said, I can't fight these people with a big legal battle. I don't have the resources for that. So what I'm going to do is keep innovating. So she started with that first innovation, and she just kept innovating and kept bringing out new products, kept bringing out new ideas, faster and faster and faster, kept growing. Her name, her brand got out there, and now Spanx is a huge company here. So one way to follow through is to figure out how you can do it, but avoid getting into fights that you cannot win. Because that's the second stone. The first stone, know our competitors. We start to get in there, we build strength, we evade attack, and then we follow through, okay? Now, this third stone is once you're in the competitive arena, your competitors you're gonna have to engage them. So the idea is, how are you going to conserve resources? You're not in a new startup is not in a place where they can just go and just spend money. And some of the biggest resources are in terms of a time that you might have. And so we're going to go back to a couple of examples here. One is in terms of gripping your opponent here. And I'm using eBay here because when they were first starting out, one of the things they did was they said, okay, one way you grip your opponent is to make a deal with them. So they made a deal with AOL, and they had to give up some funds, but they were able to continue to grow and to continue to expand. They made excessive deals with AOL, and they grew their business and they grew their brand name to a point where they became very successful in the market. So that's one way to grip your opponent. Figure out a way to partner with them. Another possible thing that you need to do, you want to sort of link into your opponent so that in some ways their success and your success are aligned. Second one is you want to conserve resources by avoiding tit for tat. And I'm using eBay again is for this example. Again, it's discussed in some of the articles. After they became successful and people could see that auctions were a really viable option, a number of firms wanted to get in there, get into the market. So eBay said, you know, we can't fight all these larger competitors. So what they did was they said, we're going to go back to what we do best. We're not going to try to match prices with them or match features with them. We're going to go back and do our grassroots marketing there. We're not going to get into that big fight. They're focused on their strengths. They continue to grow. They continue to expand their customer base and to gain traction. And then they continued to grow and continue to be the market leader there. But they didn't get into a war of attrition. And another one is to push when pulled. For example, a competitor comes out, you're starting your company, they offer, they start discounting the product or the category tremendously. One of the things that PetSmart did was really smart. They said they didn't fight that whole thing. They didn't get into that fight, but what they did was they said, we will accept the competitor's coupons. And so every time the competing firms advertised something, this great sale or what have you, and got and invested all this publicity, PetSmart said, we will accept those coupons. And so a lot of the customers came over to PetSmart as well. So all the advertising that the larger firms were doing was helping PetSmart at the same time. Okay. So we want to conserve resources. We want to master our balance, master balance. That means staying in the game. And then you want to try to build on your competitors' resources. Okay. And these are ways you can do it, because all those big resources that the competitors have, they represent potential risks and potential entry points, but they also represent ways that you can possibly grow. And so one way is to leverage the assets of the competitors. And Southwest is an example how they did that. When the Southwest first started, a lot of the major airlines were heavily invested in the major airports, in multiple types of aircraft, in certain kinds of ways of seating customers and managing their entire airplane operations. Southwest says, okay, they're going to leverage that by simply saying, okay, we are going to make our product and our service much more simple, much more cost effective. And the way they leveraged it, they said, the other firms cannot afford to do what we're going to do. So in other words, they sort of neutralize those major assets by doing things that the other airlines couldn't do in terms of cost efficiencies as a startup. Secondly, we want to talk about another way to do this is to leverage your partners. And Sony is a good example of this when they were entering into the gaming industry there. A lot of the established players were heavily invested in, let's see, it was Sega and Nintendo. They were heavily invested in a certain type of business model in which they were tightly controlling their software, they control their hardware. What Sony did was they just said there were partners. They realized that developers were partners. And so they leveraged the developers by making their systems and their games much more open source. So developers could be a partner in there. And so a lot of the developers flocked to Sony. And so Sony's game repertoire grew tremendously. Their market share grew tremendously, even though they were competing against a couple of other very highly entrenched companies. And then you want to leverage their competitors here. This goes back to what Charles Schwab was doing. They wanted to get into the mutual fund business, but Fidelity was a giant in there. So what Charles Schwab did, what they said, well, we will distribute the competing funds that Fidelity doesn't offer. And in other words, so Fidelity offers lots of funds, but they also offer their own funds. And so Charles Schwab said, we will leverage that resource, leverage their commitment to their own funds by offering to distribute competitors' funds. And that put Fidelity in much of a bind, but it enabled Charles Schwab to grow. Okay, so leveraging the assets, leveraging your partners, leveraging your competitors. And the final one is to combine multiple techniques. One technique can amplify another. I mean, you can do the puppy dog ploy, plus you can avoid tit for tat, plus you can leverage partners. A lot of them have an amplifying effect. So you have a sort of a smorgasbord of techniques you can use to go ahead and implement this judo strategy here. So a quick summary. These are the 5 stones. First and foremost, to know your competitor weaknesses, master movement, how you get in, master ways to get into the game, get into the industry, master balance in terms of once you're in there, know that you have to have a strategy to conserve resources and to keep from being, pinned or what they call in judo submitted. Then you want to go ahead and figure out ways to use your opponent's strengths against them, use the incumbent strengths against them. And then you want to feel free to combine techniques. Okay. So I'm going to open it up for questions. This is my email, of course. And then this is Judo Strategy. Yafi and Quack. They actually wrote an entire book on this, but I sort of, what the information I forwarded was their article. And then there's a strategy for startups in Gann, Scott, and CERN in 2018. So thank you very much. I will, I feel like I can't see anybody, so I'm gonna go ahead and, let's see. People may wanna still see that part. So I'm gonna just open it up for questions. How am I doing for time?
I think we're doing good on time. At least we have about 5 to 7 minutes on Q&A. We already had some questions on the chat. I'll ask offhand, but Lois, great work. Lil Curling's heart was like buzzing because I love all this type of research you've been doing, and this is great. I'll start off with one of the questions from the cohort. Tripty had a great question. It says, what suggestions do you have for the best tools to conduct this kind of competitor research?
Oh, tools to conduct the competitors' research. That is a good question here. One, I'm a fan of some of the tried and true techniques. One of the things that when you're looking at an incumbent firm, they're not in the same place as being a startup. So I think some of the traditional strategy tools are useful. In particular, looking at the types of resources they have. I mean, if you go to the Porter framework, is it rare? Is it hard to imitate? Is it valuable? Can it be substituted for? That's important there. Examining their resources, using that framework to examine their resources. Also, looking at their overall landscape. How are they positioned in the landscape? What are they committed to? I think the framework for looking at their assets, resources, and capabilities. Certainly, I mean, I almost hate to mention it, but it's still tried and true that your SWOT analysis is good there, but also understanding their value chain and these are just organized ways to think about it, because ultimately, I think that if you really want to get to know a competitor, there's no formulaic way to do it. I mean, you have to kind of just get in there and look at their annual reports, listen to what they're saying, follow them on social media, follow what the chairman is saying there. But if I had to pick some tools, I would do the tried and true SWOT. I would do the resource-based view with the resources and capabilities. And I would really clearly take a look at how each one of the segments that they are applying, that they're using in their value chain. I would make sure I understand that, particularly in relationship to how the overall industry looks, how the overall industry operates.
No, that's great, Lois. I had a question along those lines, so maybe I'll ask it now. We've been doing these kind of city highlights, private city highlights for these bigger companies, right? Okay. And one of the things was actually using tools like Gartner and Magic Quadrant to understand like your competition. Do you recommend those things too?
It's one of those things. I like all those. I mean, we've got you can use the Ansoff matrix. For established companies, you can certainly use whether or not the miles and snow matrix to see how they sort of approach the market. Sort of also understanding, the basics of their competitive strategy there. I think the tools are good, but I really do think that they are truly just a starting point. Because I think that there's no substitute for getting that individual sort of that individual study of you can't do it for all the companies, but for certainly the major companies there. I sort of think back to a friend of mine that runs a money management firm, and he says, before he invests, he actually, we as startup people, don't necessarily have that research, but they actually go visit the company. I think you have to understand exactly what each company is doing there. So, my preferred, I like a lot of the tools that, the 5 forces analysis. I like the Ansoff matrix. Depending on the company, you can also use the BCG matrix if they're diversified, or certainly to look at their product lineup as well. So those are some tools that I like to use, but I would not say that, oh no, you can't use one. You need to use another one, but ultimately, it is just a starting point. That's what I've been finding.
That's great. That's great. I have like tons of questions, but I know usually Stephen probably had a question too. Stephen, you want to pose your question?
Sure. Yeah. Got a question that we've asked a number of our speakers in many different formats. I know Curling likes this question quite a bit. But it goes along lines of, if you had a chance to talk to a younger version of yourself, Lois, so like a little Lois, before you got into the entrepreneurship or startup space, imagine somebody, maybe a member of our cohort who's just kind of getting started with their venture, right? Are there one or two tips that you might give that younger version of yourself?
Okay, so this is, but you're referring to what I would tell myself in terms of for my career.
Sure. Yeah.
I think when I think back that, I think I would have I remember a distinct time I was studying strategy, and someone from the university wanted me to sort of start looking at the growth of smaller ventures. And I thought, oh, no, that's not my field. That's not, entrepreneurship doesn't have, it's a newer field. Strategy is, a more established field. I'm going to stay there. And I should have gone with what I was really interested in. I should have pursued my passion and not be concerned about perceptions, traditions, and other manner of sort of these outward appearances. And if I remember that, I did circle back, and I did speak with this professor, and I thought, if I had just gone ahead and just followed that invitation, which was really closely aligned to my interests, then I think I would have been able to spend much more time studying entrepreneurship. I ended up there anyway, but I could have gotten there faster.
That's great, Lois. And we have one last question from the cohort. Is there any lessons learned on what you talked about as it regards to timing, right? I know there's this kind of culture, and especially Silicon Valley, that you really have to move fast or you're going to fail, right? You really have to move. You have to be agile, but you have to move fast, right? Do you have any lessons learned on that and how it relates to your topic?
Well, I think that's true. I think you have to move fast, but I also think you have to move correctly, because there are plenty of stories of founders and startups that moved very quickly, but ran into lots of problems. So there has to be a balance there. And I think it also depends on what industry you're in and what product you're pursuing and what your goals are. So I think fast, but smart. Because the stories are, you have to have that right balance between spending your time doing your customer research, doing your customer discovery, spending that time understanding your competitors, before you make that huge investment. Because there are some studies that show that actually it's not the first mover into an industry or product that makes the most money. It's actually the second and third movers. I think about Google. They weren't the first company in search, but they're the ones that did it the best. So I think a balance has to be brought in there. And I would be hesitant to advise someone to move quickly and forego the opportunity to do sufficient analysis. You got to have the balance there. I'm an academic. We can analyze things to death, but
right.
but you have to, ready, aim, fire. You don't want to ready, fire, aim. So finding that right balance there.
No, that was good. That was great. I think that the cohort all agreed on that. Thank you so much, Lois. I know I already was thinking when I was doing some of the research, we have to do a part 2 or part 3 of this, because you unpack so many different things. And so just no offhand, for the evening cohort, Lois, we'll talk again on some of these other concepts, because this is something, as Lois said, maybe not initially you need to understand this much, but these are things you really need to understand. And it's kind of like, I always feel like this is kind of, me and Joanne always said this, some things are like kind of like this kind of prerequisite, some of these are like grad, I feel this is the graduate concepts that are really amazing, but thank you for sharing it in a way that's been helpful, Lois.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. And I'm just delighted to hear that, you know, at least some people found it useful. You know, we just want to try to, you know, help people move towards their goals.
So thank you again, Lois. What we'll do, if you can stay on, because I was going to match you with someone.
Oh,
Lois.
sure.
I'm
glad to stay on.
Yeah, I was going to match you with our past, I believe, Sunny, because she did city highlights last week. But Stephen, you want to wrap it up, and then we'll do the speed networking. We'll do it for that 5 minutes.
Sure thing. Yeah, just to echo what Curling said. Thank you so much, Lois, for taking the time to jump on and to do a tech school. And thanks for the fantastic presentation and all the great knowledge that you're able to share today.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, for those of you watching on YouTube, feel free to give us a like, leave a comment down below, share your thoughts, share your questions. We want videos like these to be great resources, not only for those who are able to tune in live, but also for those who are able to, you know, watch these recorded, right? So be a part of that learning community that we have here at Fokcus, and, you know, share your thoughts, ask a question, and be part of that conversation if you can. For those of you who are on the call today, we will be doing speed networking like Curling mentioned. So if you don't want to be a part of that, feel free to jump off, and we will start that after we end the YouTube live. But as always, we will see you in the next